Hello guys, welcome to a new video of the first World Chess Championship of 1886. It's Wilhelm Steinitz against Johannes Zukertort, and today we're looking at game number 3. So the score is 1-1, and in this game we see a beautiful positional game by Steinitz, but Zukertort does come back and it ends in a really beautiful endgame, so let's just dive straight into it. Zukertort has the white pieces and he starts with d4. We have d5 by Steinitz and c4, the Queen's Gambit. Now c6, the Slav defense, and against the Slav we can play knight to c3, knight to f3 or e3. And here Zukertort plays e3, and now Steinitz responds with bishop to f5. And bishop to f5 is an interesting move. Had we played knight to c3, bishop to f5 would be a huge mistake, because now we have queen to b3. And this actually happens a lot on the lower levels, since if you try to defend the b7 pawn, simply pawn takes and knight takes, and white's doing amazing here. But okay, what's the difference if we had not played knight c3? So after e3, bishop to f5, now we cannot play queen to b3. Since after queen to c7, pawn takes, we cannot take the pawn since the bishop is hanging. That's why we needed the knight on c3. But okay, bishop to f5 and a3 by Zukertort. Now e6 by Steinitz and c5. And c5 is already a huge concession. You're giving away this central tension. You are expanding on the queen side and you probably want to play b4 and b5. But Steinitz can simply play a5. And now you cannot play b4 since after pawn takes, you're losing the rook. Okay, c5 and a5. Queen to b3, attacking the weak b7 pawn, but simply queen to c7. Knight to c3, knight to d7, and knight to a4, wanting to come in here. Now knight g to f6, and here you shouldn't jump in straight away, since after knight takes, we have doubled pawns, the queen can simply move away, and there's no huge attack anymore. So knight g to f6, knight to e2, bishop to e7, and knight to g3, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back, and here Zukertort for some reason doesn't play bishop to d3 to exchange this very powerful light squared bishop of black. He plays bishop to d2 here, and now castles by Steinitz and bishop to e2. So Steinitz is like, well, that's amazing, I keep my very powerful light squared bishop here. I can play rook f to b8. Now Zukertort castles, and the middle game can begin. Steinitz opens up the game with b6. Pawn takes, knight takes, rook takes with a tempo on the queen, queen to c3, and queen to b7. Well, better would have been to not take this knight straight away, defend your pawn, since after knight takes, well, the difference in this position is that black is up 2 tempos here. Look at this little difference. That's why this variation would have been a bit better, but okay. And also, after queen to b7 having a double attack on this pawn, we should not defend it with rook to a2. Better is to just give away this pawn. Pawn takes and rook takes and queen takes. And okay, white is down a pawn, but here he still has some activity in the position after rook to a1, having the a file for ourselves, and the game goes on. But after rook to a2, which happened in the game, white is really passive here and he has to keep defending the position. Now knight to d7 by Steinitz. Bishop to d1 wanted to come in here, and now c5. We should not take the pawn, then we would have knight takes, the rook will get behind the knight attacking the queen, the knight can jump into d3, and this is very dangerous. So that's why Zukertort doesn't take the pawn, he plays bishop to a4, but now c4. A really nice move. Queen goes back to c1, and the knight has done its job, so it comes back to the king side, knight to f6. Bishop to c3, defending the b2 pawn, and bishop to d6. After bishop to d6, what can you even do in white's position? Well, you just have to wait here. Best move is probably rook to e1 and just shuffle back and forth and wait. But here Zukertort plays f3, in which I do understand this move. You make sure that the knight cannot jump, but on the long term we are weakening those dark squares. And now we have queen to b8 with a double attack on the knight in which we win the pawn. So Zukertort has to play f4. But now we weaken this square anyway, and the bishop comes into d3, attacking the rook. Rook has to move. And now h5, defended by the knight, wanting to push h4 and kick this knight. So we play h4 ourselves. Queen to d8 by Steinitz, attacking this pawn later on, and also defending our own pawn. Bishop comes back with a double attack on the h5 pawn, but simply g6. Now queen to d2 with a battery on the a5 pawn, simply rook to b8, and we defend this pawn twice. So you can see Zukertort is trying on the king side, on the queen side, but he cannot really create anything. But now we have queen to f2, bishop to e7. We see this battery now on the h4 pawn, which we cannot defend easily. Bishop to f3, and the knight jumps in. We have a double attack on this pawn. We're going to lose that pawn. And this knight's very strong, attacking the queen, so we have to take it. And here you should not take back with the bishop. Then we have knight takes, and you have doubled pawns here, and the game goes on. But we have pawn takes, and this light squared bishop is really strong here, but it can also be caged in if it doesn't get activated. So let's see what happens. After d takes e4, knight to h1, bishop takes, Steinitz is up a pawn, g3, and bishop comes back. I mean, look at white's position. It's really miserable. Black is so beautifully placed here, and Steinitz really outplayed Zukertort for the first 32 moves. Now we have queen to d2, queen to d5, and knight to f2. a4, king to g3, and rook to b3. And you can see white can do nothing on the queen side anymore. So Zukertort's like, okay, maybe I can do nothing on the queen side, but you did help me open up the king side here. So what about rook to h1? King to g7 and rook to a1. Now the rooks are coming to the king side. Bishop to d8 and g4. Zukertort did find an escape route, but I would say try to pause the video here. This is a critical position, and find the best move for Steinitz. So what happened in the game is h takes g4, but that's actually a huge mistake, and Zukertort's back in the game. What could Steinitz have played here? Well, there are actually a couple good moves. One of them is bishop to a5. Well, what happens after pawn takes? Well, we do not really care about this pawn here. We simply play bishop takes, pawn takes, and double up our rooks and attack the queen. Also, Steinitz could have played bishop to c7. Well, how does that work? Well, after pawn takes, we have this amazing move, bishop takes f4. And you cannot actually take it back, since we have this discovered attack on the king, and after e3 you're just lost, we're winning the queen. So either bishop to c7 or bishop to a5 would have been two good moves here. Steinitz took the pawn, and now Zukertort is back into the game. Knight takes g4, the knight is coming into e5, and you can see this light squared bishop, which looked very powerful a couple moves earlier, is now caged in here. It can do nothing. After knight takes g4, Steinitz now plays bishop a5, but that's a huge mistake. Now it's too late to go for this plan, since Zukertort has one good move here, and that is rook h7 check. You cannot take the rook, since then we have this fork and you're losing the queen. So king to f8, rook h8 check, king to g7, and rook h7 check. So Zukertort cannot really find a good move. He's repeating king to f8, and finally he finds the best move, queen to f2. And after queen to f2, you can see this problem here with the queen coming in, the knight to e5, and This is a huge problem for black. So bishop back to d8, knight to e5, and white's actually winning. King to g8, attacking the rook, but simply rook a to h1. This rook on b3 is doing nothing, the rook on a8 is doing nothing, the bishop is caged in, and white is just back into the game. Bishop to f6, preventing the rook coming to h8 with a check, but we take this pawn. And after rook to g8, Zukertort finds this amazing move to make Steinitz resign the next move. Pause the video here and find the last move in this position. So in this position, Zukertort didn't simply take the rook, which is also actually winning after king takes, and then we will bring the queen into g3 and take this pawn. Well, more forcing is rook takes f6. And Steinitz resigned. Well, why did he resign? If we take the rook back, now we do not come to g3, we actually play queen to h4, attacking the rook and also threatening mate, since the knight's defending the f7 square and the queen would defend all the other squares. This was such a beautiful game. I mean, Steinitz must have had a really hard time, after this game, since he had such a beautiful position and he made this one little error with taking the g4 pawn, and Zukertort is up 2-1. I hope you liked this video. If so, please like, subscribe or comment, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.